Please help me in welcoming Laurie to the stage.
Okay, so we'll try the green part. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Dick, for allowing me to speak about this. And as he said, I'm from actually UL LLC. We simplified our name a couple of years ago. And we were primarily known as an organization that did safety certification and standards development, and we're still very heavily involved in that. At least my aspect or my responsibilities at UL deal with that, although we've gone into many different areas, including a lot of research also on battery safety. We've done some forensic analysis. If people remember the Boeing incident, we did forensic analysis on those batteries. Maybe someone are familiar with the Samsung Galaxy Note 7 issues. We did forensic analysis on that as well. And most of the standards that we develop, and my focus today is going to be on UL 1974, which is a little bit different than our typical product safety standards. It's actually a process standard for repurposing of used batteries. So moving forward here, I'm just going to talk about it, the evaluation program, the scope, and the status of the standard. So this was something that actually we were approached by, I don't know if anyone, he's kind of a gadfly, he gets around a lot. I don't know if people have ever met Dirk Spears. Is kind of involved in this area for using vehicle batteries and repurposing them for other applications. And we've also been, have had, automotive manufacturers reached out to us as well regarding this issue. They're very interested in this. And that's primarily because specifically vehicle batteries, once they lose a certain amount of energy, they may not be practical for use in a vehicle. However, there's still quite a bit of energy left in those batteries, and it happens to be a very expensive part of the vehicle, the battery, especially for pure electric vehicles. And they were looking for another use. There's still a lot of energy. Maybe they can be reconfigured and repurposed for some other applications, such as stationary energy storage. So this is a process standard, and that's what it looks at, the whole process of determining, reviewing the information on the batteries and determining if they are viable for repurposing. So it's not, and I have there underlined, it's not a refurbishing or what we call a remanufacturing. Specifically in UL, when we talk about like refurbishing of products, and we do that in many different areas, it's where a manufacturer will take in a used item, such as, let's say, a battery, and replace some certain parts and put it back out for its same application. They don't actually change the product, they just repair it and refurbish it and send it out. And this is strictly controlled by, say, the manufacturer, at least the way UL controls that, or their designated agent. With repurposing, it could be a completely different entity that's doing this, and they may or may not have a very close relationship with the original manufacturer of the battery system. And also, the intent is to actually reconfigure it for some other application. So it's going, say, from the vehicle to a stationary energy storage or other type of application. So there's a distinction there. So it's basically an evaluation program, and it's looking at everything from the incoming products and gathering information about the cells and the battery systems, the BMS and stuff. The cells, we're saying they have to comply with some type of safety testing. It doesn't have to be, say, stationary or whatever, but somehow they have to have gone through a safety evaluation, because those are the building blocks. And if you don't have safe cells, or at least some that have demonstrated, the design of the cell has demonstrated some kind of safety, you're starting out on the wrong foot, certainly with that. And then it's just, as far as the battery systems and stuff, it's just, the actual finished assembled battery would have to comply with the specific end product battery standard. For instance, stationary would be UL 1973. So that, there's, the manufacturer there's a couple of different manufacturers, and we identify there's the original OEM, so we don't, distinguish that. It could be the repurposing manufacturer, or it may not be. But the repurposing manufacturer, whether it was the original OEM or this new entity, is actually responsible for these batteries. This was a big issue, as far as battery manufacturers. They didn't want, their stuff going out there and being put into some sort of repurposed battery, and then they felt like they were going to be responsible for that. Actually, they have to, unless it's the same entity, we're required that they remove the labels, and it's almost like they're starting from scratch and they have to relabel it. And the repurposing manufacturer is the responsible entity. So we look at everything from how they store the batteries, as far as the process, how they're handling them. They actually have to have a quality control program. They can't be Joe Schmo's battery manufacturer and grab stuff off of someone's lot and throw them together. They have to show that they have knowledge for what they're doing. That'll be part of this whole process. As far as any kind of handling, we recognizing would have to, as far as shipping too, they'd have to follow all the regulations. We included in the standard also that it has to be a safe process. I think one of them actually, and this has happened with other, certainly primary battery manufacturers, or original battery manufacturers. You have to follow safety within the manufacturing process. I think one of them actually had burnt down in California, so you have to be careful. So the first step is always information gathering, and that's the first part of it. They have to have a means for understanding, what they're getting, and whatever information they can gather, specs or anything on this battery is critical to understanding that. Certainly, if they have access to the BMS, that might depend on their cooperative arrangement with the original manufacturer, such as the vehicle manufacturer, whether or not they'll be able to mine the data from the BMS and be able to use that to understand what has occurred with that battery during its life in the vehicle. And then just getting information on the modules themselves so they can determine, again, who manufactured those, what are the specifications on those, et cetera, et cetera. That's part of all the information gathering on this. Even in like first responders manuals or anything else for the whole battery system, all of this provides information on the safety. And again, if they can mine the information out of the BMS, certainly they can do that, including looking to see if there was problems with error messages, if they wanted to reuse that BMS or whatever. If there's a number of error messages or problems, there could actually be problems with the BMS, and whether that data is reliable or not, that's something to consider. So they may or may not have access to this information, but if they do, certainly that would be part of their process that we would look at. And then finally, like the visual inspection. Clearly, a visual inspection seems kind of low tech, but it's kind of an important way to understand maybe what has gone with this battery. If you see denting of cells or fraying of wire or other things, leaking of coolant or whatever, this battery may have problems for repurposing, certainly. And then, any kind of visible damage or anything, there should be a formula for rejection of parts. And certainly parts that have been rejected shouldn't end up back in the processing system. So they should have rejection procedures for that, just like any kind of manufacturing process would have. And then finally, as far as storage conditions, tracking, they have to have a controlled environment. You can't be storing batteries in too hot of locations or whatever. So all of this stuff will have to be tracked. And then they also have to do the sorting and grading process, and there's a review of different tests that we require, and they have to have, I mentioned their use of 3 to 6 sigma level, but actually we've revised this in the latest recirculation to indicate that it has to be sort of a minimum sigma level of the new battery, or even narrower if they want. And then they have to use that to sort and grade their batteries for the next process. So we have general process testing, and that would include, besides the visual inspection, OCD measurements, high voltage isolation check, the capacity check, any kind of capacity fading check that they would have to do, any kind of check of BMS and controls, a discharge charge cycling type of thing. And as I said, any kind of self-discharge, obviously that's a sign that something's going wrong if that's, excessive. And then, they have to have also an idea for process improvement would be long-term data gathering, including, so that they can make decisions for process improvement. So they would do evaluation on the cells and keep that information and refer to it for making improvements and determining how their process can be improved, or maybe what cells are better than others for, or what conditions may indicate that these can or cannot be repurposed. So this is the status of this. We started out back in June 2nd. We had the preliminary bulletin. We had the first ballot out in March of 2018. We went back out in recirculation, which means that they voted on it. We had comments. We made further changes, and then those changes had to be revalidated. And we actually achieved consensus. This will be a binational standard for the U.S. and Canada, ANSI and Canada standard, and it should be published by October 26, 2018, or at least before the end of this month. So one of the things that are important to note is the standard is being referenced in the International Fire Code. So this is because right now they actually have these out in in installations, and there's some concern about that. So they're going to be, if they're in coming future, the fire code will require that battery using repurposed batteries the factory's gone through this process. And one of the things to note too is that any system, like say battery system that's been evaluated to our stationary battery safety standard that is using repurposed batteries would have to be marked as such as repurposed. So that's being referenced in there, and I believe it may also be going to be referenced in NFPA 55, which will be the installation standard for energy storage systems. So it'll be important for manufacturers to go through this process, at least if they want to put it into the built environment. So we have a couple of scenarios that I anticipate as far as the certification. What we plan to do actually is have a registration program for these factories. So they would get registered, we put it under what we call our category code. They would have a certificate of registration, not unlike an ISO registration. And then any particular, if this manufacturer also is rebuilding batteries into, say, a battery system for energy storage or stationary batteries, then they would also have to, that battery would be have to be certified and meet the requirements of those safety standards. So it's not like they get a pass. You just look at the process and that's it. The assembled battery would have to meet the particular application's safety standard. And that's it. So I don't know if anyone has any more questions on this, you can feel free to contact me after dinner. I want to thank you again for your attention and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.